Good morning, and welcome to the Stylo News Intelligence Update. It's April 8th, 2026, and our focus today is on the Middle East, where a very fragile ceasefire in Gaza finds itself under some pretty intense and growing pressure. We're here to break down what's happening. This intelligence briefing is made possible by our sponsor, ProWave AI. They're the developers behind Stylo Intel Ops, the AI-powered intelligence platform, and of course, Stylo News, which you can get on the web and on your phone. All right, here's a quick look at our agenda. We'll start with the overall intelligence picture. Then we'll dive into the stalemate in Gaza. After that, we'll zoom out to look at Iran's regional proxy network, see how that's raising threats to the West, and finally, we'll leave you with a few key things to watch for. So let's get right to the bottom line. The ceasefire in Gaza is, for now, holding, but just barely. And what's really important to understand is that the biggest threat to it right now isn't actually coming from within Gaza itself. It's coming from these expanding pressures across the entire region. And this map really illustrates that point. While Gaza was the initial flashpoint, the whole operational center of gravity has shifted. We're no longer looking at just a localized conflict. This has really broadened into a regional confrontation that pulls in Israel, Iran, and Iran's entire network of proxy groups. Okay, so let's zoom back into Gaza and talk about the situation on the ground. The reason the peace talks have hit a wall, the reason we're at a stalemate, it all boils down to one single critical issue: the disarmament of Hamas. And here you can see that small, densely populated Gaza Strip. What's happening inside this territory is completely intertwined with the diplomatic talks taking place in Cairo. Everything, absolutely everything, hinges on the question of what happens with the weapons held by the armed groups here. And that leads us to the single most important question, the priority intelligence requirement that everything else really depends on. And that question is, will Hamas agree to disarm? Well, based on all the available intelligence, our assessment is pretty clear. It is highly unlikely that they will disarm, at least not in the near term. Hamas views its weapons as its primary source of political leverage, and our confidence in that assessment is high. So why do we say that? Well, reports coming out of the Cairo negotiations tell the story. Hamas has rejected any talks about disarmament for now. Their position is firm. They're demanding a full Israeli withdrawal from Gaza first, then they require binding external guarantees from the mediators. From their perspective, their arsenal is their main political bargaining tool. And right now, we're seeing no evidence of any kind of internal split on that position. Their leadership appears to be united. Okay, so now let's pull the camera back out again and look at how this fits into that bigger regional picture. Iran is playing a really significant role here, not by intervening directly, but through a very careful strategy of what we call calibrated pressure, and it's being applied by its proxy network across multiple fronts. And using a tool like Stylo Intel Ops, we can actually track this multi-front strategy as it unfolds. You can see continued activity from the Houthis down in Yemen, from Hezbollah in Lebanon, and various militias over in Iraq. This lets Iran apply pressure on Israel and its allies from multiple directions at once, all while very carefully managing the risk of a full-scale war. And this slide really highlights the strategic thinking behind that. You see, a direct, large-scale attack by Iran on Israel would be incredibly risky for the Iranian regime itself. But this sustained pressure from proxies, that's far more likely. It gives them plausible deniability, it allows them to manage escalation carefully, and it helps them achieve their goals without risking a conflict that could spiral out of control. Now, this strategy has very direct consequences for Western interests in the region. We are now seeing a significant rise in threats to both diplomatic and military assets, and they are now considered to be at high risk. And right now, that threat is most pronounced in Iraq. The U.S. Embassy in Baghdad has issued a specific alert, and they're warning of likely attacks inside a 24 to 48-hour window. The potential targets are exactly what you'd expect: places with a high concentration of Westerners, like embassies, airports, and major hotels in both Baghdad and Erbil. The methods of attack are unfortunately familiar. We're talking about rockets and mortars, one-way attack drones, and even the possibility of car bombs. There's also a credible threat of kidnapping by actors linked to these militias. And what's crucial to understand is this is no longer just an Iraq problem. These threats are expanding to Lebanon and other parts of the Gulf as well. A recent intelligence assessment from Stylo Intel Ops really summed it up perfectly. It concluded, quote, "The operating environment is unstable, multi-front, and permissive for deniable attacks." In other words, it is a very complex and a very dangerous landscape out there right now. So, with all of that as the backdrop, where do we go from here? Let's conclude by highlighting a few key developments that our analysts are watching very closely, and that you should too. All right, here's what to keep an eye on. First, the negotiations in Cairo. Any change at all in Hamas's stance on disarmament would be a major development. Second, there's a pro-Palestinian flotilla set to leave from Barcelona on April 12th. Historically, these can be flashpoints. Third, watch for any increase in proxy activity. More attacks would be a clear signal of escalation. And finally, pay attention to the security posture at Western facilities. If you see them increasing force protection, it's a sure sign they believe the threat is getting worse. Now, this has just been a high-level overview. For our complete, in-depth analysis of all these events, we encourage you to listen to the full Stylo News Intelligence Update podcast. You can find it on your favorite channel. Thank you for watching. For continuous AI-powered news on demand, you can always find us at www.stylonews.com.